We've been talking so much about the establishment media today, and people always come to me and they say, you know, what online resources do you recommend? Where should I go to get my information? And these are two people who can certainly help you with that. They are going to the state capitol on a regular basis. They are doing investigative work. So when you come and you ask me, where do I get my information and my news on Florida politics? James Madison Institute is one of those organizations that should be first on your favorites list of websites. So please welcome Bill and Will.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I'm Bill Mattox. You're going to hear from Will in just a minute. I want to tell you first about a strange conversation that I had. Gosh, it's been a little over a year now. I was sitting in my office one day, and I got a call from what I believe was probably a web designer or webmaster for a local county government here in the state of Florida. And it almost sounded as though he was underneath his desk talking to me in hushed tones. This is a webmaster. And he said to me, Mr. Mattox, how can we get off your ugly list?
6%. Okay.
See, he had recently received a copy of a transparency report that we had done called The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, where we had helped to make public information about how well county governments and school districts and city governments, as well as the state of Florida government, how well they were doing in making known to the public information that would be useful to the public. And lo and behold, his county was on the ugly list and he wanted off it. Well, I'm going to tell you in just a few minutes how he got off it and what we then did about it. But what I want to do first is step back and give you a little bit of a context for where this story came from, how it fits into the larger picture of what JMI is doing and what I am doing there, and then how it might help inspire you to work with us or work with others in the room to go and do similar sorts of things. Just to give you a little bit of a background, the James Madison Institute, as many of you know, is a public policy think tank based in Tallahassee. We work closely with the state government or with legislators there that are seeking to reform the state government. But we have members from all over the state, board of advisor groups all over the state. Francisco Gonzalez, our vice president for development, is here. Many of you, I'm sure, know him. He's constantly out in the state meeting people and holding events throughout the state to help better inform you about what's taking place in Tallahassee, as well as to help you understand how you might be able to contribute to the work that we're doing there. Within our organization, there are several of us who have journalistic responsibilities of one kind or another. The hat that I wear is that of, in many ways, a kind of investigative reporter. If you want to, you might want to think of me as something akin to our 60 Minutes guy, okay? Except that I don't do television. I have what you might call, or what they say in the media business, is a face for radio. So really, a lot of the work that we do on video is done by my colleague here, Will Patrick. But generally speaking, the sorts of stories that I do tend to be more in-depth. They often have an investigative angle, and I often am looking for these sorts of stories to be published or told elsewhere. Will, as he'll describe in just a few minutes, does more of the breaking news stories that we do, does more of the stuff that we do for video, and has a web. He manages our website and our news website, and so most of what he is doing is going to be published first there. Okay, what types of stories do I do? And this is where the 60 Minutes might be helpful. We know 60 Minutes for the investigative work that they do, and indeed some of the stories that I do, some of my favorite stories, have an investigative nature. Let me give you an example of this. Several years ago, during the fight, 2 years I guess now, during the fight over merit pay for teachers here in the state, we learned that there were students in the classroom during the school day who were being prodded, in some cases required, to write or call legislators to lobby on behalf of their teachers. And we were able to get copies of a writing assignment that had been given by a Lake County school teacher, where the kids were taken the kids were given basically talking points from the teachers' union and asked to write letters to their state legislators against merit pay. We were able to get a copy of these, to make these public, and to make a big to-do about how this was kind of a gross manipulation of students. And we, of course, didn't want to insinuate that this was happening in every school district or among every teacher, but it was nevertheless, I think, very helpful information, which ultimately helped to contribute to the success of the passage of that merit pay bill. So we do investigative stories of that nature. And that, as I mentioned, is kind of what 60 Minutes is best known for. But my friend Peter Schweitzer, who many of you know for his best-selling book that exposed insider trading at the federal level earlier this year. Peter is a former president of the James Madison Institute, still serves as a senior fellow, and he and I go way back. I knew his wife when they were courting, and she was living with my wife and I when we were in D.C. at the time. But at any rate, Peter exposed that story on insider trading through 60 Minutes. He worked with them while he was writing his book to be able to get this information out. And one of the things that we have noted as we've talked about the 60 Minutes model is that not only do they do investigative stories, but they also do human interest stories that will often have a little bit of a softer edge that will nevertheless illustrate ideas in action. And so we do the same thing at the James Madison Institute. In fact, one that came out just earlier this year that is out on our table is one about digital education. Here in Florida, we have seen a lot of success on a number of fronts in the school choice battle. We certainly aren't where we want to be, but we have seen a lot of success in getting various proposals passed. And so what we will often then do is to go back and do some of the follow-up work and to say, what has been the impact of digital education, of the Florida Virtual School, of charter schools and other things? And oftentimes we are able to find kind of heartwarming, inspirational stories of success that we can then tell in the context of describing the need for additional reform. And that's exactly what we did here. We found students from various corners of the state whose stories were very different. Some of them were full-time virtual ed students. Some of them were students that were in the classroom in the public school virtually all day, but wanted a special class that the Florida Virtual School offered that they couldn't get in their local community. And we wanted to expose this because we believe that the constituency for education reform is far broader than just that of homeschoolers or private schoolers or those who have already opted out, but includes many public schoolers who do not even themselves consider themselves advocates for reform, or certainly that they see themselves as being loyal to their public school, but they're often benefiting, if you will, from choice. And we want to expose that so that the constituency might broaden. And so that's one of the things that we have used our journalism project to do, is to just tell those stories. And we would invite and welcome you to feed us stories that are similar that might help to in that ongoing mission. So we do investigative stories, we do human interest stories that illustrate the effects of policy. We also do some interviews, just as you'll often see, or in-depth reports or interviews that you'll see on 60 Minutes. One that Will and I collaborated on that I'll again draw to your attention, it's out on the table, is a piece that we did in our own journal that was an in-depth interview with a gentleman who's discovered a lot of interesting ideas related to corrections reform. Not maybe the most exciting or interesting topic at first blush, but depending on how you count it, the corrections is either the third or fourth largest expenditure in the state budget. And it's an area where we believe there's an awful lot of waste, an awful lot of opportunity for cost savings, but more importantly, there's an opportunity for changes that we think will, in the long run, help to reduce crime. So we did an interview with an expert on that topic. That's included there. And that gives you kind of some sense of the breadth of stuff that I'm doing. Tends to be more in-depth, tends to be more long-term. But one of the things that we did, and this is, I guess, perhaps the take-home message that I would give to each of you, is that several years ago, like you today, I was sitting at a Franklin Center training conference. And I said, oh my gosh, I am being overwhelmed almost with ideas and with possible ways or possible things that I could do as an outgrowth of this. And I said, I've got to be sure that I come out of this with at least 2 or 3 action items that I do. And one of the things that, one of the presenters at that conference was a guy from the Sunshine Review. The Sunshine Review is an entity based in Washington that goes and rates how well various state, local, school board, or school district, city governments expose or how transparent they are, how well their websites give people information that they need. And this covers all kinds of things, just basic information about how to get a hold of your local officials or administrative officials at the local level, to things like permitting and how easy it is to access the forms that you might need to get building permits and all the rest. Obviously, there's an awful lot of emphasis on budget information and the rest. Well, they had put together these ratings and grades, and I looked at it, and all 50 states, and I looked at this and I thought, gosh, this is a treasure trove of information that's being updated regularly. We ought to make a story out of this, and do a report on what's happening here in Florida. So a couple years ago, we did our first good, bad, and ugly report. We gave those that had the A grade, they were on our good list. Those that had a D were on the bad list, and those that had Fs were on the ugly list. And then we included it in a report kind of like this, with a map inside that kind of broke down the state visually and helped people see where they were. As an outgrowth of that, we went and spoke at an event in Tampa a couple years ago that Breitbart came and was our keynote speaker for, and there was a lady there from a local Tampa Tea Party group who was in the midst of a fight over high-speed rail. And she was able to kind of just take this concept of transparency and to begin to fight against those that were promoting high-speed rail and to just simply ask questions about, why isn't this information being made public? What are you trying to hide? And that's simply asking that question put a lot of chinks in the move for high-speed rail, and they were ultimately able to defeat it. But we've also seen, soon after that, we were invited by the head of the First Amendment Foundation. The First Amendment Foundation is based in Tallahassee, and they do a lot of work with citizen groups around the state who are interested in knowing how to access publicly available or information that should be publicly available through FOIA requests and all of the rest. They are not a conservative group, but they are very open to working with groups of all kinds that want better government. And indeed, they have invited us each of the last 2 years at an annual conference that they hold during during what they call Sunshine Week, which is the week of James Madison's birthday. Since Madison was the author of the First Amendment, they claim a lineage to him. We obviously claim a lineage to him since he was the author of the 10th Amendment. But at that conference, there's a gentleman that spoke a year or so ago from Santa Rosa County who took some of this basic information about transparency, started asking questions of his local government, started turning over stones that people didn't want turned over. They've got now an FBI investigation of corruption at the local level that this ordinary citizen activist helped to stimulate as a result of using some of these tools of just open government and seeking information that public policymakers ought to be making available. So that is, I think, something that you can take inspiration from and possibly do. At the very least, take our report to your local officials, see where your county or school district is, and ask questions about what are we doing here in fill in the blank, whatever your county is. What are we doing to get our name on the A list so that we can be informing people about the kinds of things that they ought to know about their government? Okay, in just concluding, before I turn things over to Will, let me mention a few other things or a few other ways that you might want to help us in our work, or that we might be able to help you in yours. In addition to all of those things that we're doing that would be in kind of traditional news functions, one other thing that we have done the last couple of years is we've partnered with the news and education departments at the various newspapers around the state with a couple of supplemental curricula that we have developed, one on civics called Celebrate Freedom, which is designed for Celebrate Freedom Week in the month of September. This is a week in which the students are expected to study the Declaration of Independence and the kind of founding principles. It is by statute here in the state that schools do this. We've provided a curriculum that they can use in that context. We've also done one on economics called All About the Benjamins, and it is one that I would invite you to consider as well. They're both out there in that it does a lot in kind of helping students better understand entrepreneurship and private enterprise and the importance of industry and of private employment. And what we're looking for, it's a collection really of stories of people who have gone and taken these principles and made use of them in their own lives, many of which come from the state of Florida. And so we would invite you, if you know of, especially young people or perhaps especially immigrants, that you think would make compelling stories, not just for us to tell in our news channels, but to also tell in our student education arena, we would invite and welcome that. We would also enjoy hearing about success stories that you have that we might be able to help tell, to expose to a broader audience of ways in which you are having success fighting City Hall. We've done that on pensions. We've done that on a number of questions where local pension programs were going to bankrupt the city, and there were these two women down in Coral Gables who just sat time after time when the local commission was meeting to try to fight against all of the powerful unions at the local level that were wanting more and more pension expenditures, and we were able to kind of lionize, in many ways, the noble work that these citizens were doing on their own dime to help fight against and look after the taxpayers' interests. If there's stories of that kind that you think ought to be told more broadly, please let us know. We can help to make that possible. But we're looking, obviously, for excess spending at every level, but perhaps especially at the local level. I don't know about you, but there was a report that came out just yesterday about how when you look at government employees here in the state of Florida, the lion's share of them are at the local government level, not at the state level. The spending on state employees per capita for the state of Florida is relatively low from a national comparison standpoint. But at the local level, it is quite high. Indeed, school districts are one of the top 10 employers in every single county in the state. And so there is, we believe, an awful lot of waste at every level of government, but you're going to be better able to, just like that guy in Santa Rosa County, you're going to be better able to expose that at the local level than we might be coming from Tallahassee, because you're going to know a lot of the local players, you're going to know some of the things that look suspicious, you're going to be in a better position to ask some of those kinds of questions. So when you come upon information that you think is useful, that would be helpful to get out, please let us know, because we think that there's an awful lot that can be done there. With that, let me turn things over to Will, and he'll tell you some about his work, and then if we have any time left, we can answer any questions that you have. But we'll be around all day. We've got materials out on the table, and we'll be happy to help in any way we can. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And folks, don't be fooled by Bill's modesty. He has more than a visage for radio. He's an outstanding leader, an outstanding servant to the public interest, and a great reporter. It's an honor and it's a pleasure to be here today. It's very encouraging to be among citizen activists, citizen journalists like yourselves. Thank you to the Franklin Center for organizing this event. It's true, we're not really that normal. We're leaders. Leaders aren't normal at this day and age. I have a 1-year-old, so when I meet you and I hear your stories, all I can think about is what kind of future is there going to be for my son. I'm just now becoming a parent. Many of you in this room are already parents, grandparents, and you are taking up the causes for my generation, the ones that will come after me, and I thank you for that. This is a very important step. Again, my name is Will Patrick, and I am the James Madison Institute's Capitol reporter. Essentially, I'm a citizen journalist. Now, I've heard someone describe what a citizen journalist is by saying it's someone who commits random and somewhat frequent acts of journalism. There you go. We work for the James Madison Institute. It's as Bill mentioned, it's a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy think tank located in Tallahassee, Florida, our state's capital. We are free market oriented. We believe in the principles and the corresponding values of limited government, individual responsibility, and liberty. For 25 years now, the James Madison Institute has vigorously engaged in many of Florida's public policy debates, and we will continue to do so. As JMI's Capitol reporter, my job is pretty simple. It's not always easy, but it's pretty simple. I pound the pavement, I beat the bushes, I develop sources, I do independent research, then I connect the dots, and I report my findings. I focus on telling two types of stories. One, the type that the media or the establishment press just tends to overlook or omit completely. And two, I combat media bias. Would it surprise you to know that the media is biased? You know, Gallup did a series of polls and surveys over the last few years. And last year, this series was about trying to gauge public trust in mainstream media. That's a very broad term, but I think we all know what it means. Each consecutive year in the last 5 years has been a new record low in public trust in the mainstream media. Last year, I think 43% of those polled, which is supposed to be a representative sample of Americans, 43% said that they trust the media somewhat or a lot. The remaining 57, almost 6 out of 10 people, said very little or not at all. And this is the media is the apparatus that is supposed to inform the public, the citizenry, so that they can best make their own decisions. We live in a free society. At least we were originally designed to live in a free society. We must have information, accurate, reliable information, the full scope of each and every story that needs to be told in order to be self-governing. The media doesn't do a good job of this. So, the purpose of all this, of course, can be summed up in 2 words: government accountability. That's what we're all doing here today, keeping the government accountable. It begins with the recognition that elected and unelected public officials have an obligation to explain their decisions and their actions to the citizenry. This is an important attitude to take. They have an obligation to report to us. They serve us. We don't work and toil for their agendas. They essentially take monies out of our paychecks, our savings, our investments, our economic transactions to finance and pay for their agendas. Again, they are accountable to us. Without an active dedication to fact-finding and reporting, preventing corruption and misuse of power is almost impossible. The very term press itself was coined by Edmund Burke, an 18th century British parliamentarian on the floor of the House of Commons. He decried the need for outside individuals to press or pressure these parliamentarians into being more forthcoming with their actions and their agendas to the people that they were making decisions for. James Madison, our organization's namesake, also the father of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, took the lead on this. And right there in the First Amendment, he designed a protection for the press, for those that would report on the government. At that time, it was very dangerous to do that. Today, it's completely the opposite. We have a guy like Tom Brokaw. Even Tom Brokaw, about a week ago, was decrying how the Washington Press Corps is in so closely with the government. He said it was appalling to see the extravagance at these White House press corps dinners and events where the mainstream media is in so close with our government officials. It's backwards. So with respect to Florida, what kind of resources do we have to hold government accountable? I mean, why wouldn't a public official just blow you off when you made a public records request? I mean, especially if it's going to the information that might reflect poorly on them? Well, the simple answer is they have to comply. It's the law. Not everybody knows this. They have to comply, theoretically. They don't always do so, but that just means we have to take the next step. Chapter 119 of the Florida Statutes, I would definitely write this down. It's also known as the Public Records Law. It guarantees a legal right to access of state government records, and that includes any kind of recordable record. That means sound recordings, film, photographs, emails, anything written. And as Bill mentioned, an organization called the Sunshine Review, it is devoted entirely to pressing for ever greater government transparency. They list Florida as one of the leading states in open government, but we receive a cumulative overall score of B on an A to F scale. So we're a little bit above average, but we're one of the best. That's not good enough. So what does all this mean? What does all this mean? We know that this is an election year. 2012, as Slade mentioned a few minutes ago, is one of the most important elections of our lifetimes. And Florida, especially right where we're standing now in Central Florida, is the prize swing state. It's from 2000 to 2010, as reflected in the last census study. Florida's population increased 18%. Mostly people relocated here from northern high-tax states like New York, Illinois, and a lot of the upper Great Lakes states. So right now we have 29 electoral college votes. 29. We just got 2 new congressional districts, one of them in this area. That brings us to 27 representatives in the United States House. And by 2016, our total population will surpass that of New York State. We'll be the 3rd most populous state in the nation, behind California and Texas, respectively. We have say in what goes on in this state, and this state has a lot of say in what goes on in this country. And I know I don't have to tell you that this country has a lot of say in what goes on in our world. So this is important stuff. We cannot rely on the media to do the things that need to be done to inform the citizenry, to make the best and most accurate decisions, voting just being one of them. So I would just encourage all of you, if please use us, use the James Madison Institute as a resource. We produce all kinds of studies, white papers, policy briefs. We're constantly posting new information, new documents, new sources on our websites. You can go to the main JMI website at www.jamesmadison.org. We're posting every day. And our journalism website is www.capital, capital with an O, capitalvanguard.org. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Capital Vanguard. Our political correspondent that will be deployed throughout Florida, beginning in the middle of the summer, especially towards getting closer to the election. His name is Scott Scholl. Scott, will you stand up, please? There he is.
The camera.
He's already taking pictures and reporting. Fantastic. Please get with us. I would love to give you my contact information. Use us as a resource. We want to serve you in your efforts. This state is huge. It's huge. It's almost, from Key West to Pensacola is almost as far as it is from Pensacola to Ohio. This is a huge state. There's no way we can cover it all. There's just not enough of us. And who would know your community or your town or your city or your region of the state better than you? Please connect with us. Use our resources. We want to tell your stories. I was talking to a nice lady earlier today, and she said, well, I have to work, and I just don't have time to create my own blog and write these things. But I see injustice and this type of stuff going on all around my town. And I said, send it to me. Let us help you tell your stories. Again, that's www.capital, capital with an O, capitalvanguard.org. That's our journalism site. or you can go to our main website, www.jamesmadison.org. Thank you very much.